Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Combating Cancer. My name is Gwen Kelly, and I'm your host. If this is your first time tuning in, I just want to say thank you so much for joining this community. It means a lot. A little bit of background information about me is that I was diagnosed with stage 3 astrocytoma brain cancer at the age of 19. The reason why I created this platform is because I wanted to bring anyone that was either in active treatment, in remission, grieving the loss of a loved one, or someone that just wanted to come on and learn more about cancer and how they can help others. I am so thrilled to announce my guest today. I have Gwen Sturm, and I got to tell you, Gwen is one of the most interesting people that I have ever met in my life. He is very charismatic, and he is just overall such an amazing human being. So hi, Gwen, how are you?
Wonderful. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled. I remember when we talked last week, just as an introduction, I got off the phone and I think I told 5 people about you right away because you just totally encapsulated me with everything that you were sharing and your journey. And I find it very interesting that you've been on chemotherapy for the last 18 years.
Yeah, 18 years, 6,300 days of oral chemo and 610 days of IV chemo. The 6,000 is the big one.
I thought my 30 days of radiation and about 60 days of chemotherapy while I was going through treatment was tough. So I just cannot even imagine having those statistics like you.
I didn't think I would have these either. It's one day at a time.
I love that. And when we were talking previously, I had asked you, how do you go about knowing that you have to continuously take chemotherapy? And one of the biggest things that stood out to me, as you said, it's not my entire life. My main goal is to put a smile on someone's face every single day. You'll have one bad day here or there, but it doesn't mean that that's going to prevent you from putting a smile on someone's face. So can you go in about that, of your motto of putting a smile on someone's face?
I wish I could take credit for it, but when I first was diagnosed, it was total shock. So I started reading as much as I could read, and today I just research as much as I can research. But I read an article about a man who had died from my cancer. And he was thanking everybody for the 6 months he had. And then he went on to say that he wasn't like his friends who had died in Vietnam. He wasn't like his friends who had died of a heart attack. And he wasn't like his friends who had been in a car wreck. He was just thankful for every minute he had. And he was celebrating life. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to celebrate life every day. I'm not going to let cancer define me. And my objective is every day is to put a smile on somebody's face. And that's what I do today. I found a neat trick that I work with now is when I'm talking to somebody on a call center and you can tell they've had a bad day, getting that person to smile or laugh. That's when you're actualizing and putting a smile. Such a difficult job. They have no positive interaction with people generally. Because a lot of times people are calling to complain. But when you get somebody like that to smile and laugh and talk to you about themselves, that's when you're making a difference. And every person's life you make better makes the world better. And so that's kind of what I think about and try to think about every day. And it gets infectious because when you put a smile on somebody else's face, there's no doubt you're going to be smiling yourself. So that's what it's been about. That morphed into my photography, then morphed into my first book on cancer. There's another book coming about evolution of cancer treatment, then my photography books, and then my books on the military and my first novel series, which is coming out in a few months. So I just try to celebrate life every day and make it better for me and others. And by doing that, it changes everything.
Well, I can say that you have put numerous smiles on my face from these past conversations that we've been having. I feel like I've been like grinning ear to ear, and so I'm kind of a hard one to please with jokes.
Yeah, there are all sorts of funny things. I told you about this, the joke I faced with the anesthesiologist, and I was going in for a 7-hour surgery. Anesthesiologists are always late, except for the ones at Mayo Clinic. They actually interview you before you get there. But this doc was like all the other ones late. So anyway, he was pushing me in, and he asked me if I wanted to listen to any music. And I said, absolutely, I love music. Then he said, what do you want to listen to? And I said, Jimi Hendrix. And then he said, what song do you want to listen to? I said, Are You Experienced? Well, every nurse and the tech in the OR broke out in laughter. And he didn't hear it. He didn't get it. He was so into finding the song. And so the last thing I remember before I was put out, and not knowing whether I was going to wake up or not, was all the nurses laughing and the techs laughing. And I told the anesthesiologist later, because he asked me how I could do that, not knowing if I was going to wake up or not. And I said, it's the last thing I do in my life is to put a smile on a bunch of people's face and have a bunch of people laugh. Then I've done okay.
I love that mentality. I think, as I was sharing with you before, I have very similar humor. I always say that when you get diagnosed with cancer, if you're not laughing, you're going to cry. But that's just what you have to do when you get this diagnosis and all of a sudden cancer becomes a part of your life. You can just switch your mindset and say, I'm going to be positive despite the statistics, despite what other people have gone through, because you really have to create your own roadmap.
That's right. Have you ever told anybody else on the broadcast what you did with your left hand?
I have, but I'll say it again for any of my first-time listeners here.
Yeah, go ahead and do it because I think it's very good.
Okay, so after my brain surgery, it was about 8 or 9 hours long, and previously I had a seizure that happened on the left side of my body, and my neurosurgeon was like, hey, while we were doing the surgery, we had a little indicator pop off, and we're not 100% sure how your left hand is going to be, your left side of the body. You may have some issues. So he was like, why don't you wiggle your toes? I wiggled my toes. Shake your legs. I was shaking my legs. And then he was like, okay, I'm really nervous about this one, but can you try to move your left hand? And I looked him dead in the eyes and I said, yeah, I don't think it's going to work while I'm flipping him off with my left hand. And my mother was appalled, and my dad and Dr. Grant just kept laughing. And it was one of those things where humor was just a good way to cope with it in the moment.
You made me think of something because, as you know, I've had 55 surgeries now, but we always have you count back like 5, 4, 3, 2, and then you could just do the 1 that way. And then you give your left hand again instead of hitting the number 1.
Maybe you got to take a little bit of page out of my notes. And
I thought that was pretty good. I mean, what you did was just, that defines things though, because, you put a smile on the doc's face. And he's so worried. They're always so worried, the good ones, because they're so conscientious. And if they think something might have gone wrong, anything you can do to reduce the stress for them is a huge gift for them.
It's actually very interesting that you bring that up, because with some of the guests I've had on here, they always say that when you're the one that's diagnosed with cancer, you try so hard to make everyone else feel not uncomfortable with it or kind of ease the tension. Humor really lightens up the room because unfortunately people can be very uncomfortable when they find out you have cancer. For some reason, I don't know why, but it's like all of a sudden they're the one that has the issue. And I was speaking at the Lakeville Rotary and Brackets, and I had to speak for about 40 minutes. And when I was done, this woman came up to me and she said, I really admire how you're able to work the room and talk about something that can be very uncomfortable, but use your humor and your smile to make everyone actually laugh and be interested in what you're saying. And I just think that's really huge, that a lot of people don't really recognize that how you react to the situation can actually change other people and lessen the blow for them and make them less nervous or uncomfortable.
Most people don't understand that the patients have it rough a lot of times. I've done very well on it. I've been very blessed. But the people I think who have it the hardest time are the caregivers, because nobody's there solving their problems, and they're responsible for solving all of yours. This has kind of driven home to me recently. I got really sick because of a medical issue, and I was hospitalized. I was actually medevaced out of Jackson, Wyoming. And my 2 golden retrievers, I think, knew how sick I was. And when I got out of the hospital 10 days later and came home, I told my daughter who was with me, I said, sweetie, do not open the door. Let me sit down on the bench on the front porch before you open the door. And she said, why, Dad? I said, I'm worried about my 2 Goldens, Lulu and Blitzen. And she just kind of looked at me, and I sat down. The door was open, and my 2 dogs started crying. Okay, now think about that. They're my caregivers. Okay, I was sensitive to their needs, but I also didn't want to get knocked over. But the thing is everybody around you is a victim of your disease along with you. And we have the ability through the use of laughter and hugs to make other people do better. The one thing people a lot of times will ask you is, how are you doing? And the one thing I've learned is that's not a question. That's an introduction or a greeting, because they really don't want to know. Most people don't want to know how you're doing. But if you tell them the truth, If it's not great, it's very awkward for them. If you just approach it as a greeting, everything's fine. Have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, that makes me laugh. I actually saw something online the other day where it was kind of an internet meme, and it was of this woman being like, "How are you doing in the grocery store?" And the man goes, "Okay, well, I just got divorced and I can't pay my rent." And she's just like, "I thought you were going to say I'm doing well. How are you?" So it's really a fake answer when people ask that, because you don't really want to know. You just hope that people say good, because when you actually respond back and be like, "Hey, I'm actually not having the best day," they're like, "Well, that wasn't the script that you were supposed to go off of. You were supposed to be like, everything's good." And then we walk past the hallway.
And being sensitive to others is not always easy for everybody in these kinds of situations, especially when it's early. And it's one of the reasons why the ancillary services that you get at good institutions, whether they're counselors or navigators or others, are so critical, because you can actually talk to them. The one thing along that line, though, is at Yale, the nurses have an escape room. That's when something really has gone bad for a patient. They don't want the other patients to see it. So they go to the escape room. I don't know what their real term is for it. I should know after 18 years, but they're human too. And doing everything you can to make their lives as good as possible is important. That's the art of listening. And I'll give you an example. My dad was a very young company commander during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. He was 18 years old, and battalion headquarters was wiped out. And Dad was named the battalion commander as a first lieutenant. I got a new nurse recently. This was about a year ago, not that recent. But she started talking about the military. She knew my military background. And she told me that her dad was a battalion commander who was killed during the Battle of the Bulge. So I said, "Was this your married name, or, what's your maiden name?" And she gave it to me and everything else. That afternoon, while I was still in the hospital, there's a book called the Green Book, which is the U.S. Army History of World War II. And I just had a feeling that somehow we had connected before, some way. I looked it up, and her dad was my dad's battalion commander when he was killed, and my dad took over. So that day, I spent some time getting an original copy of the Green Book with all the maps and everything else. And when I came back 2 weeks later from the next round of IV, I gave it to her, and I had marked in the book where it mentioned her dad and what had happened. She cried because she couldn't believe I had listened to her that much. And folks, listening to the people who support you and help you can do amazing things for them. It didn't take me any time to figure that out, because I just happened to be a military historian, and I had a family relation. That doesn't happen very often. But when it does, take the opportunity to say thank you. It's really, really important.
I 100% agree with you. And I think that's beautiful. And even just knowing you for about 2 weeks, you have impacted my life tremendously. And I actually want to get into your photography, because it is absolutely amazing. I was just in awe at all of the amazing imageries that you got, and the fact that on our first conversation that you would be willing to donate a piece of your original artwork to the gala that we're hosting on April 18th is just remarkable.
Wow.
I've really never met someone like you that has fully just been like, how can I help you in any way, without even knowing me that much, just based off of a conversation. And I think that you're a prime example of what all of us should be.
Don't give me too much credit. I mean, we all have our faults, but one of the things I try to do at the end of every conversation with somebody and at the end of every phone call is, first off, say thank you for taking the time to talk to me. But the second thing is ask the question, what can I do to help? What can I do to make your day better? And I'm lucky because I've got a whole bunch of pictures. I shoot eclipses all over the world, and wildlife and landscapes here in Jackson, Wyoming, where Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone are. I've been given a great piece of cloth to try to capture images on. But just asking somebody and meaning it, what can I do to help? If somebody's had a bad day and you ask that, a lot of them won't even hear you say it, but you said it. But always saying thank you at the end of every phone call, because they've taken the time to talk to you, is an incredible gift you're giving back to the other people, because it means you're showing them respect. You could disagree with somebody completely, but if you show them respect for their ideas, if we would all do that, it'd make the world a better place.
Agreed. I want to get into a little bit what we were talking about before, your book that you're currently writing right now, because you and I were saying that it takes a village when you're going through cancer, whether that's just your family and friends around you or your care team. And I want you to be able to share some of that information with our listeners that are going through the cancer process for the first time and don't realize how beneficial other things are out there.
Okay, well, this is actually critical. I finished my first novel, which is book one of a 6-book series. And then I had something happen to me last year where I almost died because of some mistakes. And so I decided to research the issue, and I was just shocked at what I found, shocked in a positive way. So I'll give you my experience on this first. As a lawyer doing big deals, you always have teams of lawyers with you, and you have accountants, you have all sorts of specialties. And you need all those people together to get the right answers to do a good job. And so when I started this, I had initially a psychiatrist because of some personal issues for me that had happened, and my mentor had died and my dog had died. And so my GP said I needed a psychiatrist, and I did. Well, it turned out I had narcolepsy and ADD, so I got medicines for those, and that addressed my cancer fatigue syndrome and something called chemo brain or cancer-related cognitive impairment, CRCI. And those things went away with the medicines I got for that. So I had my own team. There's a gentleman who 40 years ago, he's a psychiatrist / psychologist, and he talks about teams all the time. So I started doing research on it, and it turns out that my cancer, if you have a professional team surrounding you, I have a 70% reduction in the mortality rate for my cancer versus a silo practice. So if you have a team of professionals working together who communicate in a near perfect fashion, you have a 70% reduction in my mortality rate. So I said, okay, that's fine, that's mine. So what else is there? Well, in lung cancer, there's a 40% reduction in mortality rates if you have a team. And in renal, kidney-based cancers, the mean survival goes from 32 months to 73 months. And in breast cancer, it's a small increase, but it's 16%. And in head and neck cancer, it's also 16%. These are dramatic amounts of changes. I said, well, what is the team that you need? So I did a bunch of research, and on December 11th last year, I wrote my first paper on it. And there are 30 people you need, I think. I think the second most important person is the psychiatrist, because they can address cancer fatigue syndrome. If you have narcolepsy, they can prescribe something to keep you awake. And if you've got cognitive issues, like chemo brain issues, they can address that probably with ADD meds, but that's something for your specialist to work with. But you go through the whole thing. The people that have become very important, I was kind of my own navigator, but you need a navigator, somebody who solves the problems for you, who makes sure you get your appointments, but also the one who anticipates problem for you and helps you solve them. And that's critical. Well, you go through that, and a physical therapist, which I've had forever. When I first got diagnosed, I had a physical therapist approved by my insurance company for 4 to 5 days a week for 10 years. I don't think I'd have made it without her. Then a pharmacist. I've had the pharmacist in Jackson saved my life twice by preventing me from getting medicines that would have contradicted other medicines. But the one I like the best is the one at the end, which is a music therapist. I mean, these are all people who are there to provide support for you. But in the case of my physical therapist, or my sports physiologist, as she likes to call herself more now, she sees me every week now that I'm living in Jackson. And she takes pictures of my back and sends notes to my principal oncologist and other members of the team whenever she sees a change, whether it's a change in my skin, where my cancer presents itself, or my energy levels or something else. Well, that changes everything. And then you've got the professionals who don't read, which are the ones we don't want to talk about a lot, because 99% do. But if you ever are helping somebody and you get the feeling that the physicians or the other folks that are helping aren't reading or not paying attention, that's a critical issue, because the reduction in mortality rates only happens if there's comprehensive, clear, and nearly perfect communication. But when you reduce somebody's mortality risk by 70%, it's good to ask questions if you don't think they're going to get that 70% benefit. NIH has written about it. I think there's 37 studies involving 56,000 patients where this happens, and they've proven it over and over again. So it's actually, let me get to you right, a 2025 meta-analysis study by Williams and Thompson, which analyzed 179 studies involving 56,187 patients that said about using a multidisciplinary team approach reduced the risk of death in every patient that was studied. How often do doctors say that it will reduce the risk of every patient?
Never.
So how much would a company be worth if it reduced risk of mortality by 10%? Well, the average is 70. Okay, it'd be hundreds of billions or maybe even $1 trillion. That pill would be worth it. Well, these are just professionals working together and communicating with each other. That's not hard, and we should demand it. So recently I was asked by a friend whose daughter had 25 stage 4 metastatic breast cancer what the best hospital was. It took me quite a bit of time to research it, but it turned out to me that the best hospital in the country for it was University of San Francisco Medical Center Breast Cancer Department, where they have fully endorsed and embraced this multidiscipline approach, and their results show it. Their results are, quite frankly, stunning to me. I'm not a physician. I'm a reformed lawyer who loves to research, but it is absolutely breathtaking to see the results that they're getting. And all the main hospitals that I'm aware of are starting to talk about these topics. People have asked me for my lists, which are highly footnoted for all the members of the team. And the reason for that is to address the energy issue and the chemo brain issue, because as a cancer patient, if you've got full cognitive function and you have all the energy to do things, it may just be spending more time with your grandchildren or grandparents. It changes your outcome. And I feel that every day.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important just to know your options and to advocate for yourself and know that cancer is a terrible disease and there's so much more than just medicine that can prolong our lives, and that you really need to find the people that are right for you and that are going to be your biggest cheerleaders and advocate for you, because they're not going to come and find you. You have to go and find them.
My first novel has been put on hold, it's with editors and stuff, but my next book is entitled, I think, More Than Hope, The Compelling Promise of Multidisciplinary Integrated Cancer Care. And I go through a lot of history in that book, but I think I've got 27 memos, and they're all going to be QR coded, which means if you want more specifics about something I'm saying and the reasons for it, you'll click on the QR code and it'll pop up and you can print them off yourself. And the only request I have, if you disagree with something, please let me know. Or if your doctor disagrees with me, please let me know. But the one thing that is certain, that is silo-based practices do not get the results, the positive results that we're seeing with multidisciplinary. There's basically uniform responses in that. And I've never seen a group of different doctors, different specialties, all agree together that there's a uniform approach that works and it reduces mortality by an average of 70%. That is a godsend.
Well, kudos to you for putting in the work and getting the research so people like myself and the listeners here will be able to get more informed and know what they should be advocating for and looking for their treatment plans.
Believe it or not, there's some people who oppose it because they think they're losing control. And there have been some articles published that disagree with some of the other articles, but those articles have been quickly rebuffed. But anytime you have a study of 56,187 cancer patients, and there's 100% agreement that they have reduced mortality rates for that group across the board. And I think the reason I'm alive today, my daughter was told when she talked to my oncologist after the first meeting that I had 2.5 years to live, and I'm now in my 18th year. I have a team to start with, a team that I put together with, and the help of one other doctor helped me put it together, and it worked for me. I hope it works for everybody who listens too.
Before we wrap up today, is there any final thoughts you want to say or advice to anyone that's listening that you wish you would have known before you got diagnosed with cancer, or a different mindset that you have just embraced besides putting smiles on people's face?
I don't know if you ever noticed I've got these green bands. My son had these made for me. At the time, he was 7 years old. I got diagnosed. On the inside of all these, they say celebrate life and lymphoma. And on the inside, it says for my dad, DJS. And that's my son's name, Daniel Joseph. And they never come off. So much of beating cancer is mental and attitude. Celebrate life. Find ways to celebrate. Find things you love doing. And if you got energy-based problems or other things, get it solved. That doesn't work. The NIH has published reports on that. But just literally celebrate every day. We're all blessed. And then there's one more trick to learn. When you have somebody who you disagree with a lot, there's one other thing I would suggest to him. My son and I disagreed a lot for a lot of years. And I finally figured out how to communicate it. I said, buddy, from now on, we're not going to disagree about anything until we find out what we agree upon. So let's figure out what we agree upon, and we'll find out we're all a lot closer to agreement. And that will reduce stress in your life. So let's find what we agree on.
Well, I want to thank you once again for coming on and sharing your story. And I am so unbelievably excited to see you in April. I think it's going to be amazing. And
Well, give people, are you going to have an online auction for part of this?
yep, we're going to have an online auction too.
I don't take any money for art that's sold or any of my astrophotography. 100% of it goes to health and health-related causes. Every penny on the dollar is going to go to the Brain Foundation. So, folks, please support this wonderful leader who is giving us all a lesson on how to live by maybe buying one of my pieces of art. And if there's another piece of art there that you see on my website, which is my first name at my last name.com, glensturm.com, and you send her a note that you want to buy it, we'll find a way to sell it to you so that they get more money.
Thanks, Glenn. You were amazing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to meet you in person.
Well, that is the end of today's episode of Combating Cancer. As always, if this message resonated with you or you think someone else would benefit from hearing it, please feel free to send it. If you or someone you know want to come on and share your story or have a business inquiry that fits this mission, please feel free to reach out to me. But that is all I have for you guys, and I will chat with you all next Wednesday.